with that, I would like to introduce our very first speaker, who is Professor Nadia Ahmed. Professor Nadia is works on the intersection of environmental science and law, but also technology and social justice, and is currently an associate professor at Barry University School of Law, where she teaches courses on environmental law, energy law, property, as well as business organizations. She is also currently pursuing a PhD in environmental science at the Yale School of Environment, and her dissertation focuses on using advanced machine learning techniques for climate and induced conflict evacuation using satellite as well as drone data. She's published quite a number of groundbreaking work, including research on climate cages that examines the often overlooked connections between climate policy, the incarcerations, as well as social displacement. So with that, Professor Nadia, please, if you could just want to unmute yourself and join us.
Okay, good morning. Thank you so much for having this program. I think it's really important to look at the intersections of what is happening relating to energy justice. And also, I think this volume is particularly insightful in that it has a really appeal across sector within the energy space, and there's also appeal globally as well. And so with my talk, I wanted to build upon a law review article that I had published originally in the Kansas Law Review, and then also touch on a few points from my previous chapter from the International Bar Association's book series on energy and infrastructure law. And just also as kind of as a bit of a background in addition to what was already shared. My focus is on energy and environmental justice, but I also focus on energy siting, renewable energy project development, along with issues on how to address inequities that exist more broadly within social movements. And so the title of this talk is The Baseline Bar, the No Action Alternative in the United States, as really a case study. But I also wanted to share why it would also be important for you. In particular, there's been a rapid deployment of investment in the renewable energy space all across Africa, but seeing that it's not always happening like equally. And so as you will see, investments, they have been increasing within Central, Southern, North and East and West Africa. And you're going to see more development as well in this space. So I think being able to recognize the development and deployment and why it's needed. The US, in terms of being a large emitter of carbon emissions, is not on track to really meet the Paris climate targets. And research that was done showed that 90% of coal must remain unextracted, and nearly 60% of oil and gas, oil and methane, fossil methane gas have to remain underground to have even a 50% chance of being able to keep global temperatures from rising to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And we're clearly not on target to reach those levels, and that we're going to be facing runaway climate change. And so the census, the sense of the baseline bar is that the existing U.S. Environmental policy mechanisms should lead to or have included in them a no action. And so at this point, for example, environmental, social, and economic metrics for a proposed federal agency action should lead to a recommendation of no action. And so this can be achieved through the no action alternative. And this is already built up and embedded within the code. And so what we're also going to see as well is the way that it intersects with other clean energy, or not, with other environmental law and policy. So in the United States, this includes uh, Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the Endangered Species Act. I had my students have done presentations at the end of this semester. And I have also seen, for example, is that the layers of permitting that are required, not just in the US, but in other places, also include you have to follow federal policy, state policy, and then there's also uh, permitting that's required at the local level. And so for renewable energy developers, they would need to really be able to navigate the entire space and how this would work. Um, and that to really think about the development and deployment, it would require specific metrics to be, once they're met, it would require that the project be shown as being economically unfeasible because of this because of this idea of the concerns of high carbon emissions. Previously, and so when I first started working on this project in 2016, 2017, there was a few projects that were on the books. Those included the Alaska's Pebble Mine project and TransCanada's Keystone XL pipeline. And there's been increasing and decreasing political will for these projects. So one of the things I had argued back then is that even if, for example, a project is stopped, there's no reason that it may not come back. Um, and the reason why we're seeing more concern towards environmental issues is because of the health impacts, particularly, and also other concerns over private property rights for energy extraction and development. There's also been a number of lawsuits that have developed. 10 years ago, there was recognition of the harms that were caused by lead pipes, and they were also not met equally. And so those were some of the issues that had been taken into account. Um, and what I also observed was that there was a number of legal gaps that exist with being able to provide specific mechanisms for change. And so even though there may seem to be a lot of environmental regulations, there also was not an update to this previous environmental legislation. There were in the 1960s and 70s, there was a flurry of environmental laws that were developed both in the United States and globally. But since that early fervor, there has not been key follow-up in the sense that there have been only a few updates to the environmental laws, but no major changes or no major new environmental laws that were brought forward. And so what's known as the mother of environmental laws in the United States is known as the National Environmental Policy Act. And this has been subject to interpretation and enforcement uh, based on who is in the White House, but also the interpretation of the courts, and also how the states will also be as serving as gatekeepers as well. And so what NEPA doesn't actually impose an independent requirement for a federal agency to impose a legal environmental baseline. And so in one case in particular, they had said that the establishment of a baseline is not an independent legal requirement, but rather a practical requirement in environmental analysis, often employed to identify the environmental consequences of a proposed federal agency action, to identify the environmental consequences of it. And so this is why it's really important to also see, why there isn't really a rule that addresses this. And so one time when we were taught in the book proposal phase of the project, I had been asked by a colleague, I've never heard of the baseline bar, and I've been teaching environmental law for a long time, and I thought, yeah, it is not, it is something that I essentially have come up with on my own, because I think that this is just something that needs to happen. Um, and so one of the things that you're going to see an increase is is the development of climate litigation cases. So in the photo that I have here is the lead plaintiff in the climate litigation accident of Kelsey. Her name is Kelsey Juliana, and so they have brought forward a case with a number of youth plaintiffs. They were not successful in the original case, but they were successful this past summer in a case of Held versus Montana. And so there will be increasing climate litigation actions. And so the development of regulatory actions in concert with this litigation will be something that will continue to happen, especially with the high rate of development of public lands for oil and gas operations, which had really increased in, quite a bit during the Obama administration. And just to give you a bit of a high-level overview of the National Environmental Policy Act, at the time that it was developed, it was somewhat quite revolutionary because what it argued and what it put mechanisms in place for was that the federal government had to pay for an environmental impact assessment. Typically, and especially in different projects that I've worked on overseas, I've seen that the company that's trying to do the action is to pay for the environmental impact statement and conduct it as well. Here, having the federal government creates a layer and buffer between having other people also involved with this development. Looking at the kind of the nuts and bolts of the environmental impact assessment, it requires a number of environmental impacts having to be offered, and then seeing if there's any adverse impacts associated with that can be avoided, and then also looking at the relationship between both short-term uses of the environment and then how it would impact the long-term economic, social consequences, and then also seeing if there would be any types of irreversible or irretrievable commitments of resources. So what's interesting about this process is that it really requires an interpretation. So the interpretation itself can also vary. So what we're also able to really develop and see is that the interpretation of NEPA and also seeing how the Council on Environmental Quality, which is a division within the White House, can really work to draft these regulations. And so that's, I think, been an important development. And what another idea that's really been floated more is the idea of zero growth. And so one of the features that was listed within the Brundtland report said that development should meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to also meet their own needs. The project that I had mentioned earlier in Alaska, which had been approved during the Biden administration, is called the Willow Project, which I had talked about more extensively in the book chapter. And so it would allow for oil drilling in the National Petroleum Reserve. And so the land is owned by the federal government, and it would lead to about 600 million barrels of oil. But the oil would take years to reach the market because the project is still like in the construction phases. And it would also generate enough oil to release 9.2 million metric tons of carbon pollution a year, which would be the equivalent of adding 2 million gas-powered cars to the road. And another thing that I wanted to just touch on more briefly, if I have some time, um, is looking at how this also flows into the international space. And so how we have to think about how we're going to calibrate finance mechanisms under the International Renewable Energy Agency and and the Energy Charter Treaty. And this is important because there is more development that is happening in emerging markets. And so The transnational energy law regimes that have developed have occurred in parallel to the climate change adaptation measures. And so the financing and funding mechanisms of IRENA, as well as the Secretariat of the Energy Charter Treaty, have played a role in how this happens globally. In addition to that, you also have the OPEC meetings that are happening. And so OPEC itself was founded in 1960. It had 14 member states, and it was really sought to be able to handle different disruptions that were happening as a result of food insecurity, labor disruptions, terrorism, natural disasters, and peak oil time horizon. And I think also seeing how there was the renewable energy sector in many areas has is starting to tip to outperforming the fossil fuel market. So this is something that OPEC has been mindful of. Um, and seeing where the development is happening for world energy transitions and where the markets are going to, this is really a broad-based sector that is developing. And to really make it happen, it's important to see the ways and the rings in which the climate equity occurs and how it has impacts based off of poverty, extreme weather, flooding, health, and heat stress, and also waves of migration that are also brought in place as well, not just by climate, but also climate-induced conflict. The idea why this is important is because it flows into this other idea of system dynamics, which is a way to think about accelerating the targets of the Paris Climate Agreement and also overcoming hindrances of the Energy Charter Treaty. So since I had first written that book chapter, I had instead argued for a few changes and provisions to the Energy Charter Treaty. Since I started working on that in like 2016 or so, 2019 was when I wrote my first law review article on it. There have been a number of countries that have essentially withdrawn from the Energy Charter Treaty, which I think is a really interesting development. And I think what's also happening globally leads to more changes. So, for example, IRENA was developed right after the global financial crisis. It's when its first preparatory meeting was held in 2009. And this also precipitated the Arab Spring in 2010 and 11. So because of different instability and market concerns that were happening, there was a desire to have a more diverse energy portfolio put in place. And so I think having this systems dynamics thinking and applying it to energy governance and resilience sector can be very important, because what I have seen is that especially that the renewable energy space, it relies on Western legal tools for renewable energy governance and really overlooks over other possibilities. And so this theoretical framework is really particularly important because it can be successfully deployed in both business and entrepreneurial settings in the renewable energy space, and that it leads to far more rapid deployment and development of renewable energy sources. Um, and so I'm going to skip through this slide here. And so the investment framework of the Energy Charter Treaty is important because it was also formed as a result of different changes geopolitically, particularly following the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the Energy Charter Treaty was supposed to be a way to protect interests of the former Soviet states for energy investment, exploration, production, and transportation. NGO groups have had concerns about the Energy Charter treaty, referring to them as the one treaty to rule them all, which was a reference to the Lord of the Ring. What it has done is it has minimized the effectiveness of dispute resolution provisions that exist between the investor and the host country. So when we think about what we need to do to move beyond the Paris Agreement, the Energy Charter Treaty also will come into play with being able to provide more ambitious um, proposals that wouldn't happen without the Paris Agreement. I'm going to pause right here just to see how much I have on time.
I think we are good on time, Professor Nadia, so
Okay.
you can go
All right.
ahead.
Thank you. And so I think what I'd also stress is that there has been compliance with different various objectives of the Paris Agreement, and being able to do that would require far more radical change. And it's also important to recognize that the United States, which has really seeks to position itself as a world leader, isn't always able to do that, especially in the space of climate leadership. And this is, I think, particularly alarming because the U.S. is really looking in terms of whether or not it even wants to consider going forward with the nationally determined contributions in 5-year increments. Will be important to see how that would be playing out. And then I think it's important to really move beyond the Paris Agreement as the status quo. One of my colleagues, Uma Utka, she has observed that the context of federal policy reversal creates an environment where companies have counterposing renewable energy goals are going to stand out. So from the perspective of a renewable energy company, what they would be doing in terms of their development and deployment that would be more ambitious, even if there are not federal or governmental targets that are put in place, would actually lead it to expand more rapidly because the supply is not meeting the demand, and there is more of an interest in being able to develop the to develop renewable energy, and so that would actually allow for more changes to occur. Um, During the previous Trump administration, it actually undid many of President Barack Obama's environmental initiatives, withdrawing the US from the Paris Agreement, rolling back regulations like the Clean Power Plan, and more recently ending California's authority to set its own stricter fuel emission standards. So I think it will be interesting to see what the future Trump administration or the incoming Trump administration will be doing to different environmental regulations. I don't think we would expect the exact same in the second Trump administration than in the previous one. In fact, the CEO of Exxon Mobil has encouraged the United States not to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and considering that the oil and gas sector consists of the largest delegation to the Conference of Parties, or the Climate COP, it would be interesting to see how the climate sector, which has really already been able to really infiltrate the negotiating space, and to really also make sure that its agenda and its needs are being met, would really be able to support this transition, and is actually encouraging the incoming president not to withdraw from the Paris agreement. And I think it's also important to recognize that for energy diplomacy and multilateralism, there are a number of intergovernmental organizations, as well as different UN affiliated organizations that have been in play and have been working all across the globe. Many of these institutions are are essentially creatures of the West, but they have led to increases in trade, and especially energy diplomacy. What I think IRENA is interesting is because it's really a brainchild of the global South, and so when they had the first preparatory meetings for the International Renewable Energy Agency, they had over 170 representatives from over 170 had 170 representatives from over 60 countries, and they were able to build up quite a bit of political momentum at the time. And Irina's goals was really to become the world's first intergovernmental organization that focused on renewable energy. And so, in two preparatory workshops that were held, more than 100 representatives from 44 nations attended and also discussed the founding of the IRENA Treaty, which then later became known as the IRENA Statute. It provided financing mechanisms and initial work program. And at the final preparatory meeting that they held in Madrid, in Spain, more than 150 representatives from 50 countries met to discuss the establishment of this preparatory commission. And then IRENA was officially formed in 2009. And so at the time, governments worldwide had made it clear that their commitment to changing the global energy paradigm, and more than 75 countries signed the original IRENA statute. And so the kind of the vision for IRENA is really important because it's really seeking to promote widespread and increased adoption of renewable energy with a view to sustainable development. It is also has been inspired from a belief system that the vast opportunities that are offered by renewable energy for addressing and gradually alleviating problems of energy security and volatile energy prices. And so there's also been a convincing process of the major role that renewable energy can play in global greenhouse gas reductions, and also contribute to the stabilization of a climate system, and also allow for a sustainable, secure, and gentle transit to a low carbon economy. And so it can also is able to, what the ARENA statute seeks to do is to really foster a positive impact of renewable energy technologies to have a way to stimulate the sustainable economic growth and also to improve and create jobs. And this has really been motivated by a huge potential of renewable energy and providing for a decentralized access to energy, and also in developing countries and access to energy for isolated and remote regions and islands. Um, there have been a number of um, implications in terms of the use of fossil fuels and the inefficient use of traditional biomass on health. And so these are some of the issues that are going to be taken into account. And so the members of the or signatories to IRENA, they really have a desire to establish an international organization for renewable energy that can facilitate the cooperation between its members, while also establishing a close cooperation with existing organizations that promote the use of renewable energy. And the IRENA building, when it was first developed, was quite breathtaking to see in terms of how it was truly a net zero building, and all the different efficiencies for building growth that were included within it. The headquarters of IRENA is located within Abu Dhabi, in the United Arab Emirates. The What IRENA has done is, in the 10 years plus since its founding, it has been able to serve as a conduit for being able to provide views of renewable energy deployment, renewable energy capacity statistics, renewable energy cost studies, and also the global atlas, which I'll share with you. And if you want, you can also access it. You can't really access it on your mobile device, but if you have a computer, you should be able to access the IRENA global atlas online. And this actually takes away thousands of dollars for emerging markets, and even states in the European Union, in the United States, in terms of how they want to do their development. And so if you just basically search on your browser IRENA global atlas, this would pop up, and it's a web interface to be able to improve and access this information. And even in Nigeria, you're going to see quite a bit of a development that is happening for the renewable energy sector. And and I think that there is starting to see like a broad transformations in the African energy grid to renewables. And so the goal, I think, of IRENA has also been to build solar everywhere, because the cost parity for renewables has started to outperform the markets. And so these aren't really just done as vanity projects. They are really done um, as an economic driver. And so some of the key takeaways that I wanted to share is that that because there's so much possibility for having supply chain disruptions and the emergence of financial crises, this has led to a desire for greater innovation as well as investment to combat uncertainty and volatility within various energy markets. And so this concern is also handled by why there's concerns about the energy prices not being really able to balance the price concerns. The United States, for example, invests a lot of efforts in energy into making sure that it can really make the price of oil affordable. But with changes that happen within the markets, it's not able to always do so. And so banks have also sought to invest in renewable energy projects through corporate lending, project finance, mezzanine finance, and refinancing. And so there's a whole host of suites that are available, financial suites to be able to do that. And the financial policies will also improve based on stronger national and subnational renewable energy policies for resilience and sustainability. And then also I would add in that multilateralism has worked. The Paris Agreement is a multilateral agreement that can be used to fill in deficiencies of other international trade and energy agreements, namely the Energy Charter Treaty. And so when we see agreements that are not working well, the global market will seek to adjust accordingly. And so, see, these are some of the additional sources that I have, and I'm happy to answer any other specific questions you may have.
Thank thank you. Thank you, Professor Nadia. Thank you for that very, very insightful contribution. I think, yes, you're absolutely right. I think system thinking, it's really the way to go, and we need to rethink how we approach these in relation to energy governance and the resilience of our energy systems.